What is going on, everyone? Today I'm going to be giving you my non-spoiler review for Scream 7. Now, I will be jumping into spoilers at the very end of the video, so after the rating segment, make sure to click off of the video to avoid spoilers, and I recommend probably not reading the comments if you want to avoid them as well. We're going to go through the positives and the negatives and then give this a rating out of 10. I'm a big fan of this franchise. I started watching them in 2021. We actually reacted to the first 4 films on this channel, and then I watched 5 and 6 in the theaters, and ever since then it's definitely been one of my favorite horror franchises. They're definitely some of the most consistent slasher movies out there. I feel like a lot of other slasher franchises have quite a few stinkers within their series, whereas I feel like with Scream, they're usually at least decent, even the weaker ones. So let's start off with the positives. One of the biggest things that I really enjoyed about this movie was, of course, Sidney. Now, she is mostly the face of this franchise. I'm not one of those people who think that she absolutely needs to be in every movie for it to work. I've never really understood that thought process because I think you could do as many of these movies as you possibly want and she doesn't have to be a part of them. The only thing that really needs to exist for the movie to work is the concept of there being a killer and you don't know who the killer is, and then you find out at the end of the movie, and I think if as long as you have the Scream, mask itself, the Ghostface mask, you definitely could consider a Scream movie. Even without the mask, I feel like the Scream TV series, which didn't use the main Ghostface mask, was also pretty good. So I don't really think you need Sidney in all of these for them to work, but I really like Sidney as a character. She's definitely the best character in this franchise. She's one of the best final girls in horror movies in general, and we haven't really seen her as the centerpiece of one of these movies since Scream 4, because of course she wasn't in Scream 6 at all, and when she was in Scream 5, to be honest, she was more of a cameo in that movie. She didn't really have a big role to play. She was just kind of there for a bit, and that's about it. But this movie, she is actually the main character. The trailers kind of made it seem like her daughter, who she named Tatum, is the main character, but I would say Sidney is still the main character of this movie. Tatum's definitely like the secondary main character, at least you could maybe say she's, half and half with Sidney, but for sure this movie is heavily centered around her, and I really enjoyed that. I thought it was very nice to have that. It really felt like a classic Scream movie because of that. You definitely could say it's getting a little repetitive with the whole idea of there's always someone coming after Sidney. It's just non-stop, but they do kind of talk about that a bit in this movie, like just how ridiculous it is that like people just keep coming after her and how it's such an awful part of their lives that they just have to deal with. And so I do think there are some new conversations to be had with this movie that we didn't see in the previous movies, and as a whole this film feels very similar in the tone and the style to Halloween 2018. If you've seen that film, you probably know what I'm talking about. The idea of it being mostly a legacy sequel where we get to see the return of the main final girl of the original film, and at this point she's quite hardened. She's definitely prepared for this type of stuff. But something this movie does that's very different than Halloween 2018 is kind of the opposite of what Laurie Strode does in that movie, where she's really trying to prepare her granddaughter for the possibility of an attack from Michael Myers. In this movie, it's kind of the opposite, where Sidney actually doesn't want her daughter to live in fear. She doesn't want her to constantly have to think about how to survive. She still has things set up in her house to protect herself. She obviously owns guns. She has certain safe areas, like some hidden rooms. There's definitely things that she has to protect herself and her family, but she doesn't really want to have her daughter just live a life of constantly trying to learn how to fight. And I actually think that was quite a different approach that I wasn't expecting. Now, as the movie goes along, that obviously changes a bit, but generally speaking, I liked how that started, and I liked how Sidney also doesn't really want to talk about her past. She's like very just, I really don't want my daughter to know a lot about that. And I thought that was a very unique approach for a legacy sequel. A lot of the other characters in this film were decent. I wouldn't say they were great, though. They don't really develop them that much, but you had Ben, Lucas, Hannah, Chloe. I didn't even remember most of those names, from the movie. I had to look up the cast list because they're not that memorable, to be honest, but they're not bad. Like, I wouldn't say I was, dreading these characters on screen, because I did enjoy them in the movie. They just are kind of underdeveloped. They don't really spend too much time showing what type of people they are. They're just kind of thrown in there to, add to the list of suspects, but I don't really feel like they developed them nearly as much as some of the other characters, which we could talk about that a bit in the negatives. I just wanted to mention, at least I enjoyed them to a degree. That is considered a positive in my opinion. Probably the best thing about this movie, or at least one of the best things, is the kills. Now, Scream is definitely not known for its kills. It's definitely the franchise where, you know, people critique the fact that the kills aren't very creative, they aren't very gory, they're usually just stabs with knives, and that's about it, right? And don't get me wrong, there's quite a few stabs in this movie, but they really do find some unique and creative ways to kill off some of the characters in this. I would say in particular, at least 2 to 3 character deaths were pretty damn cool and creative. Like, they found a really unique way to do it. And I would say there was one in particular that might be my favorite in the franchise. So if you're here for the kills, if you want to see just some crazy, gnarly stuff, I will say this movie does do a pretty good job at that. The film is well directed and well choreographed overall. This is Kevin Williamson's first film that he's directed. He's obviously known as a writer more than anything and as a producer, and he did a fantastic job because I genuinely think this was very well directed. I wouldn't say it's one of the most interestingly shot films I've ever seen, but every scene felt like you understood what was going on. It was, you know, well choreographed, where the characters moved in positions that made sense. It wasn't like they messed up the framing of it or anything. And there's quite a lot of scenes that I just enjoyed looking at. I thought they looked pretty good. The chase scenes were actually really good. There was quite a few creative sequences they had. So yeah, I enjoyed that part of this film quite a bit. I thought it was very entertaining. Another thing I loved was the soundtrack. Now, Marco Beltrami thankfully returned to this franchise. I don't think he composed one of these movies since Scream 4, but he was the composer of the first 4 Scream films, and I do like the soundtrack in those films quite a bit, so I definitely missed not having him in Scream 5 and 6, but he's back now, and yeah, the soundtrack was incredible in this movie, so definitely one of the better things about the movie. Another positive I have is the intro of the movie was pretty good. The intros are usually something that people like to talk about as like one of the most important parts of Scream, how they start off the movies, and I will say the intro here, it was quite different. It was 2 characters, a couple going to Stu's house that has been turned into this like like museum for the Ghostface stuff, and there's like this guy who's just obsessed with those movies and he just wanted to mess around with it, and obviously they get attacked by Ghostface. But I thought it was a pretty good intro. It was a pretty long one, but it was a nice one. I think it was well executed. The last positive I have is that this film does do something really interesting involving Ghostface. Now, I'm not going to go into specifics with that until we get into the spoiler segment, but I do think what they did with the whole Ghostface concept in this movie was actually quite unique, and there's multiple elements of it that was quite unique. One thing in particular that I've been wanting to see for a while, and I thought it was pretty cool that they did something like this. So yep, hats off to them for that. Now let's get into the negatives, and I do feel like some of these negatives, especially this first negative we're going to talk about, is one that you could say for the past couple Scream movies, and honestly you could probably say it about most slasher movies in general. But it is kind of hard to talk about because I always feel like you need to have some nuance in this conversation, because it's not always a bad thing, but sometimes it's a bad thing. And this is the concept of characters making stupid decisions or just doing stupid things, doing things that don't really make a lot of sense. And the reason I say you need to have some nuance when critiquing this is because it's not always a bad thing to have characters be stupid, because sometimes that's realistic, right? If you're in a life or death situation, yeah, some people are going to freeze. Some people are going to make mistakes. Some people are going to trip. Some people are going to forget that they could, you know, call the police. Like, there's all sorts of different situations that could happen depending on, you know, if you're in that life or death scenario, right? So it's hard for me to sit here, watch the movie and like be like, oh my God, this character didn't do this and this. And it's like, that just goes against what being human is. Like, humans make mistakes, humans mess up. People aren't going to be perfect, and they're not going to be superheroes in every single scene. So I can't watch a movie and go, oh my God, why this character make this stupid decision? That's poorly written. It's not always poorly written. It's just the character made a stupid decision. That happens sometimes. But here's my issue though. I think it is a lot less compelling to have characters get into a situation because they did something stupid, as opposed to them getting in a situation because the person that they're fighting is just really smart or really, you know, strong or scary or whatever, and is able to put them in that situation regardless of how many right decisions they make. To me, that's more compelling, and I feel like that's a better way to put your main characters into situations. Now, I'm not saying this movie does this a lot where they have the characters do stupid things, but there was enough moments that it did start to bother me at some points. And I think the thing that bothered me more than anything was the lack of calling the police. Uh, I don't know how, modern films get like away from this though, because yeah, obviously people have their phones on them nowadays, right? People always got their cell phones attached to them. So the chance of someone not calling the police is pretty slim. So what can the writers do to make it so the characters don't have a situation where they could easily call the police to help them? Usually the movies like to have their phones break or something, but this movie didn't even do that. There's quite a few scenes where characters literally on their phone, but instead of calling the police, they just like text their parents or whatever. It's like, okay, well, you can call the police as well, and you're the only one in fear right now. Therefore, it would actually be more likely the police will get here faster instead of you texting someone to help, but it's just a singular person. Why not call the police? And I don't know. Again, it's one of those things where it's like, I get it. Some situations happen where characters aren't thinking right or not thinking straight. That's totally understandable, but does it kind of bother me when they just don't dial? All you gotta do is dial 911. It's that simple. And I don't know, for some reason that just doesn't happen very often in some of these movies, but it's not just Scream 7. This is a very common thing with slashers nowadays. And so I had to mention it because I did notice that in this movie. They even made a pretty big point that the police were going to be watching over the Sidney's family throughout this film. And they kind of just disappear after that, like never to be seen again in the whole film. So I don't know, that was weird to me. But again, I understand it's hard to write around that because ultimately you have to find a way to make the police useless in order to make the actual threat of the villains feel, scary. Because if the police can just easily show up and stop the threat, then it's not really an interesting situation anymore. Next negative I have is that I do feel like Gale, Chad, and Mindy were quite underutilized in this film. So I was very excited to hear that they were going to be in the movie. Of course, we knew Gale was going to be in the movie for a while, but Chad and Mindy returning I was not expecting. And I really liked their introduction to this movie. The way they were brought in, I was like, oh, that is awesome. So glad to have them here. And I do like the scenes that they have in this movie, but I can't help but feel they were really underutilized. And I really, really left the movie feeling like I wanted to see more of them because honestly, the scenes that they were in, I really enjoyed them, especially Chad and Mindy. They had some great dialogue in this one. So definitely wish they were in it a bit more than they were, but ultimately still enjoyed their presence in the movie. And like I said before, I was talking about this a little bit in the positives. As much as I did like the new characters, were they perfect? No, definitely not. They were also underutilized, or at least underdeveloped is a better word for them, I guess. We didn't really learn a lot about them. And I would say the issue with that is because they kind of jump into the killer stuff pretty fast in this movie. There's not a lot of room for characters just being kids, right? Because obviously they're meant to be younger, they're meant to be in high school. There's not much time for them to just be in high school, right? You go back to the original Scream, there's a good hour of the film before people start actually dying and dying and dying. You know what I mean? I guess obviously the movie starts off with the big death, but after that it's pretty much just oh my God, I can't believe that happened, but they're still going back to their lives, otherwise. This movie's not like that though. It just goes right into the death and it's just nonstop death. And it's like, okay, well, there's no room for any just developing of characters, having some scenes with Tatum at school with her friends. They don't really do any of that. And so I feel like I didn't really care about the characters as much as I wish I did, even though I really liked them when they were in the scenes. It's just they didn't do enough with them to really make it so we learn a lot more about them. Therefore, we care more if or when they die. There were some cameos in this movie, and I'm not going to say specifically who if you haven't heard it. Now, I'm not really sure if they were leaked or if this was something they just revealed. I have no clue. It would make no sense if this is something they revealed on purpose because I did hear about it a while ago. They weren't in the trailers, but these cameo appearances, to me, I feel like only really work if they're not spoiled, you know what I mean? Because they're not significant enough for it to feel like this big, oh my God, look at these characters and they have these whole roles to play in the movie. They're just cameos, really. So again, I don't want to go into specifics in case you haven't heard about it, but I think it definitely lost its impact because of the fact that it was already, revealed to most people if you're on the internet, I guess. I remember hearing about it months and months ago, so that was something. But I wouldn't say they really did much for me, to be honest. I feel like they were just kind of thrown in there for fan service, but it makes sense why they were there. There was obviously a reason for it. And that kind of gets into my last negative, which again, we're going to talk about this more in the spoiler segment of this video. But I do think the killer reveal was a bit disappointing. And here's the thing. I did like what they were going for. I like the actual theme around it, the concept of it. And the events following the reveal were actually pretty good. I liked how they utilized the killer or killers I'm not going to say what it was specifically, but I don't necessarily think the actual choice of who they chose and what they did with this character beforehand really worked for me all that much. I wouldn't say it was bad. It's definitely not my least favorite killer reveal in this franchise, but it's definitely one of the weaker ones though. I would say it's like top 2 or top 3 worst. And it was just the sense of that I just didn't feel like there was much compelling story behind it. Like, honestly, the story behind it was quite convoluted and just, in my opinion, not all that interesting. But again, I liked the character and I liked what they did with the character. It's just a matter of the reveal itself didn't really do much for me. Like, I don't think my theater made a single noise when it happened. So there was that, but I still overall was okay with other elements of this reveal. So overall, even though this is definitely not one of my favorite Scream movies, it's definitely not in the top 3, probably not even in the top 4. It's also not at the bottom. I wouldn't say this is the worst Scream movie. It's kind of just in the middle. It's one of the weaker ones, probably towards the bottom, but I wouldn't say it's at the bottom at all. I'm going to give this a 7.8 out of 10. Yeah, that is a very high rating for a movie that I am saying might be one of the weaker Scream films. But like I said, the series is very consistent. There's not really any movies in this franchise that I think are just straight up bad. So that's including this one. I did enjoy it. I thought it was a pretty good movie. But ultimately, there was quite a lot of negatives that held it back from being a lot better. And they did just recently confirm that they are working on a Scream 8. I have absolutely no idea what that one's going to do, but I am looking forward to it, I guess, whenever that comes out. Probably not for a few years. There's a lot of things they could do that could be quite interesting, but ultimately, they have to do something very, very unique at this point. I feel like this far in the franchise, they have to go crazy. They have to go to space or something. You know, once you get to like the 8th film, it's time to go to space. So let's quickly talk about spoilers. Like I said, if you haven't seen it, please do not watch this segment of the video. We're going to be talking spoilers here. Didn't want to do a separate video for this because ultimately I don't have a lot of spoiler thoughts to mention, but I just wanted to quickly talk about the killer reveals and some of the character deaths because those are obviously spoiler things and just overall the concept behind the killer. And that is obviously the idea of it being these characters who basically used AI to, you know, make it seem like Stu returned from the dead. Now, we knew for a while that Stu was going to be in this movie in some way, shape, or form. And for a while, I thought it was going to be some AI deepfake thing. And so I was completely right with that, right? It made sense to me, right? That's a big thing going on nowadays. It makes sense this movie would try to have some sort of meta commentary with that. I get that. But there was actually a long part of this movie where I genuinely believed that Stu was actually alive. Like, genuinely. I was like, okay, he might actually be there because this looks too real. I think they maybe went a little overboard making it seem too real. Like, the technology is much further than the technology we have today. I don't think you can make it deepfake look that good today. Maybe you could, I don't know, but that looked like crazy good. And it's because they literally were just shooting with Matthew Lillard, obviously. He was literally just there. So, yeah, I'm not gonna lie. There was moments where I was like, you know, maybe he is alive. And I honestly would have been okay with that. Like, crazy enough, I don't think I would have been sitting here thinking, oh my God, this is so stupid. I would have been saying, yes, this is very campy and weird, but I mean, crazier things have happened. Like, why not? Let's bring back Stu. And so obviously that ended up not being the case, but I was definitely down for it. And I'm going to be honest, I did not predict the killers. I didn't. I did not think that it will. Actually, that's not true. I didn't predict them at first, but it was once, I believe her name was Jessica. They're such insignificant characters that I honestly had to look up their names after the fact. But she opened the code to that coffee shop, and I knew that because I believe she also worked there along with Sydney. So I was thinking, okay, when someone opened the door, they knew the code. I was like, oh, it must be Sydney then. If she knows the code, of course it's Sydney. They even made sure to show a scene of her closing up that shop earlier in the film. Like, yeah, okay, that's probably her once that happened. But the doctor, the guy that worked at that psychiatric facility, Marco, didn't suspect it to be him, but I mean, I was okay with it, I guess. I don't know. The thing is like, I really enjoyed Jessica as a character after they revealed it because she was just so crazy, and I think that was quite interesting. Like, the way she was just running at Sydney and screaming and yelling. I don't know. I kind of like that. That stuff was fun. But other than that, the reveal as a whole was like, okay, it was a little like, I think it would have been better if she had a better motive, but she really didn't. Honestly, her motive was so boring. It was just so plain. I feel like there should have been some sort of like backstory where she somehow was connected to someone, or I don't know, something like that. But there really wasn't any of that. So I don't know. I thought that was a bit disappointing. And I do like, however, and I mentioned this in the positives, where I really liked how they did something different with the ghost faces here, and this is the fact that they killed off one of the ghost faces halfway through the film. That was that Carl guy, and I really love that moment where they unmask him and they're like, who the fuck is this? Like, they don't even know who it is, because usually the ghost faces are someone they know, and so it was very different for them and they were just kind of confused by it. But I liked it because that was different, right? Obviously it's not always going to be someone you know, it could be someone you don't know, and I thought that was kind of cool. I thought that was just quite different, and I definitely appreciated that for sure. As I said before, I really did like quite a few of the character deaths, in particular Hannah and Lucas. And Hannah was the one that was hanging on the when she was doing the play, and she was hanging up on the thing, and then Ghostface was like, you know, swinging her back and forth and cutting her while she was going. That was a really cool one. And also Lucas was the guy who was thrown onto that sharp thing in the bar and like went through his head, and then it was like spewing out of his mouth. That was probably my favorite. That was actually really creative and probably the best one in the franchise. I can't think of a single other kill that was that good. Like that was really good, really creative. So I like that they're starting to get more creative with them. That is cool for sure. And yeah, other than that, don't really have too many spoiler related things to talk about. I enjoyed this movie. Like I said, I know a lot of people probably aren't going to like it. I saw the Rotten Tomato scores were low, and I kind of get why. Like, again, the movie doesn't really do that many new things. It has a couple of new things that I thought were cool, but as a whole, it's not really like having a lot of deeper, you know, meanings behind it. It does just feel like another Scream movie. So I can get why people don't like that, but for me, that's something that I actually did like. I liked it. It was a new Scream movie, and it felt like a Scream movie, so I like that. But do I want this for Scream 8? No, I think they need to get a little bit crazier with it from then on out. Would I prefer something crazier in this one? Yeah, for sure, but I didn't need it necessarily, right? That's kind of my mentality here. But overall, I enjoyed it. Hopefully you guys did as well. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. I will see you on my next one. Peace out.